Let's talk about the long-term scarring effects. I know a lot of economists like to think about these things in terms of long tail effects that we're going to see for years to come. What do you think, as in your team, when you look at what's happened and where we are right now in the recovery, how do you see the long-term scarring playing out over the next 5, 10 years?
Well, any big event like this is going to leave some lasting effects. And I think the big one is that the whole world now realizes that you have to be better prepared for pandemics. So resources that would have gone into growing the economy will go into pandemic prevention. We'll have more money going to healthcare, more focus on the risks of spreading disease, and which is a good thing because we came into this pandemic very unprepared. There are also some negative aspects to this. The pandemic could create a lack of confidence going forward, which tends to hold back activity. And the pandemic's also added a little extra tension to this trade war story and this kind of U.S.-China battle as people try to blame each other for their problems. And that is going to kind of weigh on, the global trading system for a while to come.
Exactly. And I wanted to talk about some of the trends that were already in motion that may have been accelerated due to the pandemic. I'm talking about things like deglobalization, but there are other factors out there that were already happening, but seem to have been, again, accelerated or ignited because of what went down. Talk to me about some of those, the ones that you've been tracking.
Yeah, I mean, the deglobalization is probably the most important thing. I mean, we had the trade war coming into this crisis. We had a bit of a respite during the election year, but trade war has always been sitting there in the background. The U.S.-China relations have not improved at all. And it's not like you can kind of seamlessly decouple. It doesn't work that way. The world economy is very integrated. And we're seeing that right now with the disruptions to supply chains. If you get a problem in Malaysia, for example, can affect the auto industry globally. And so it's very hard to unwind all these chains without creating some disruption. So we need to watch that. I'm hopeful that this will happen gradually in an organized fashion, but I am a bit worried. There are some other things going on that are more positive. One of them is the adoption of new technology. I mean, sometimes, stress and crisis is the mother of invention. And so right now, I mean, two things could come out of this. One is faster adoption of labor-saving technology and improvements in productivity that come with them. And the other is reorganization of workplaces. I think coming into this crisis, most business leaders were scared to death about, their workers being at home and not under the watchful eye. And I think what we found out is that for most workers in white-collar industries where you can work from home, actually works quite well. Personally, I love getting rid of my 2.5 hours of commuting every day, and I split the time between doing more work and enjoying myself a little more. So it's a win-win situation. And I think that the new work world will have more hybrid out there, and that's a good thing. One warning, though, it is a challenge if you're going to do hybrid work or full-time at home work. Developing new people is a lot harder. And that's the one drawback, which I think makes it important that companies continue to have their managers and workers come in at least part-time into the office.
Right. That team building is so important. Even in our own company, we've hired hundreds of people that have never met some of their colleagues for the first time, but you hear that company to company, industry to industry. You just can't build team when everyone's in their homes. But at the same time, let's talk a little bit about the K-shaped recovery, right? This has been a very uneven recovery, not too dissimilar to 2008, 2009, but maybe more extreme because it happened so quickly. If you had a job, if you had equity, if you owned stocks and owned your home and had some income and were able to keep your job, you probably did pretty well through the pandemic as long as your health was intact. If you didn't have those things, the ladder just got a lot steeper, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, this has been a remarkably uneven recovery, and COVID has hurt low-income people a lot more than upper-income people. So folks like me who can work from home have done fine through the pandemic. People who are in high-touch jobs where you have to go and be interacting with a lot of people, which are generally lower-paying jobs, got really hurt. Now, I am optimistic about a recovery going forward. Right now, we're in a bit of a dead spot because of the escalation of COVID cases. In particular, I worry about high hospitalization rates, which are really not good for confidence and really are really an inhibitor for people going back to work. Right? If you're worried about getting COVID, it's very scary to go back to a workplace where not everyone is vaccinated. So, but I do think that as we get past this Delta wave, and assuming we don't get another worse variant of COVID, you're going to see a pretty robust recovery. There's a lot of monetary and fiscal stimulus in the economy, and it will be released in a more powerful way once you can get the reopening going again.
Yeah. To wit, we're in the middle of a Fed meeting right now, a Fed policy meeting on interest rates and policy as to when they may dial back those $120 billion of monthly bond purchases that they've been doing for the past 13 or 14 months. But let's talk about the support from from central banks and from governments, because it's been unprecedented. Tons of government spending. I think we have a chart on the amount of government spending that's been out there and the amount of and the low level of interest rates. Are central banks just going to be here to save the day no matter what happens from now on by keeping rates pinned to the ground and by doing quantitative easing? Is that just what they have to do from now on?
Well, I think that when you're in a crisis like this, you got to go all in. You need effective monetary and fiscal policy. It's not really a good idea to have interest rates this low and have this much fiscal stimulus when you have a healthy economy. You're going to overheat things. And so I do think that this lower inflation, low interest rate environment is likely to stick for a while. But we will see a little bit of edging out of this unusually weak interest rate and inflation environment. And I do think the Fed will succeed in what they've said they want to do. They want to not create runaway inflation, but create a little bit of lubricants, quote unquote, into the economy with a bit of inflation. And that allows them then to start raising interest rates. And the reason that's important is we know at some point there's going to be another crisis. And in a sense, they need to rearm themselves, to reload the policy gun. And so I view it as a good sign when the Fed is able to, due to the recovery in the economy, stop their bond purchases, start raising interest rates, and set themselves up for the next crisis. So, yes, low inflation, low rates environment, but it'll change a bit. And I think investors need to be aware that we're probably in a rising interest rate environment over the next couple of years.
For folks out there that don't study the macroeconomic environment as closely as you do, what is the danger or the long-term detriments of all this excessive spending, of these low interest rates? Obviously, inflation is part of it. We're seeing it front and center now, but some of that is supply chain issues, because we can't get ships unloaded and we can't get truckers to truck it across country, the goods across country. We don't have enough semiconductors, et cetera. But folks are worried in general about what it means to debt and deficits going forward. And that just seems to be a problem we keep kicking down the road. What is the actual problem that many of us will experience, if we experience it all, to all of this spending?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you in the short run. You've got a lot of supply constraints. You've got COVID impacting ports and transportation and production of critical materials. So getting COVID under control will help a lot in that regard. The problem with super easy policy is, while it's certainly appropriate during a recession, and I applaud a lot of what we've seen in Washington from the last year and a half, as you get into a more normal recovery, you're going to reach a situation where you're having two negative impacts. One is you're basically hoarding resources away from the rest of the economy. The economy at some point will reach limits in how much it can produce and how much it can grow. And at that point, if you continue to run massive deficits in the federal government, you're going to be you're now robbing Peter to pay Paul in the economy. That is not a healthy thing. We want a more balanced economy. So it's important that Washington develop some budget discipline in the next few years. And the other thing, of course, is what we just talked about. I mean, right now the inflation pressure feels temporary. What's the hottest market out there? It's used cars. And it's used cars because people want don't want to use public transportation, and they want to buy a car, and new cars are having supply chain problems. So we've got that massive inflation pressure. The bigger issue down the road is about overdoing the stimulus to the economy. Too much easy Fed, too much easy fiscal, and sometime in the next year or two, you get a more sustained rise in inflation. So that's the risk of overdoing it. It's not that we're going to have a debt crisis and people are going to abandon the dollar and all that. That's not an issue. It's really about overdoing it and distorting the economy and creating inflation risks.